really formed a bond, and especially the little girl in the photograph.
It was so odd, so strange, all the horrors Rich had seen in battle, and it was this little face that kept coming back to haunt him.
Here's a young daughter that doesn't have a father, thanks to me.
Year after year he kept it in his wallet, as the torment he felt failed to go away, as it settled on his life like a darkening cloud.
The only thing I could ever say is, why don't you just get rid of it? You know, let it go, get it out of your life, and you can forget it and go on.
And 20 years after his return from Vietnam, that is what Rich determined to do. They were on vacation, he and Carol, in Washington, D.C., and when he saw the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Rich knew what he could do with that now tattered little photograph.
I said, you know that picture? I said, I'm going to leave it at the wall. And her face lit up. I could just see it. It was, this is something good.
And sitting in their hotel, he decided to do it right.
I sat down on a bed with just a scratch pad that was in the hotel room. And I started thinking, I thought, if there was any way possibly that you could talk to that soldier, what would you say? And in like just a couple minutes, I scribbled out a little note.
In it, he said those few things he'd always wanted to say. Not that he regretted being in that war, not that he regretted serving his country. No, he didn't. It was instead that unending guilt, that uncontrollable sorrow at having taken away a young father's life.
Dear sir, for 22 years I have carried your picture in my wallet. I was only 18 years old that day we faced one another on that trail in July, Vietnam. Forgive me for taking your life. So many times over the years I have stared at your picture and your daughter, I suspect. Each time my heart and guts would burn with the pain of guilt. Forgive me, sir.
The next day, Rich placed the photo and the letter at the foot of the memorial, under the names of 58,000 Americans who lost their lives in Vietnam.
And at that moment, it was like I just finished a firefight and dropped my rucksack and got to rest. And that load I was carrying was gone. It was
all lifted off.
Oh, all lifted off. It just felt great. I felt free. I felt relieved. I felt free.
Or so he thought. Every day, hundreds of people say goodbye to bits and pieces of the war and leave them here along these granite walls. And every single thing, sacred or profane, is collected and boxed up by park rangers, including Rich's photo, which just happened to land at the top of one of those boxes, which just happened to land face up, which just happened to be seen by another Vietnam veteran, who knew right away this was something different.
I thought, what is this? So I reached down and picked it up. Cobra.
Jory Felton is curator of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Collection. He has seen just about everything here. But a picture of an enemy soldier?
I really did a double take.
You don't often see a thing like that at the wall.
Well, I haven't seen it in about 30-odd years, that green uniform.
And he read Rich's letter of apology.
I read that letter, and it was about taking a life. It's very difficult to do that. That decision has to be made in a matter of seconds, and you have to live with those decisions for the rest of your life. So it was somewhat comforting, if that's the proper term, to know that someone else had been through that, but they've set it down on paper.
And before long, the little photo and all the emotion it conjured up infected this veteran too. A tiny, determined spirit floating from one old soldier to the next, reminding them both of the price they paid for pulling the trigger.
And that haunted me for years and years as to who the little girl was.
What is it about that image that was so powerful? That you'd hang on to it, that he'd hang on, that you couldn't let it go in a way.
I think it resonated someplace in my psyche. You have to understand that I was in a combat unit. This was about taking someone's life.
Of course, Rich knew none of this back in Rochester, Illinois. He was getting on with his life. He thought he was finished with that little girl, except she wasn't yet finished with him. Coming up.
It was almost a nightmare. It was like, you know, little girl, what do you want from me?
An obsession returns, and a journey is launched.
I'm going to find that little girl. I'm going to find that family.
When Coming Home continues. There is a powerful silent emotion that surrounds the monuments to American wars. and of this one, the remarkable wall, a great and ever-growing collection of the bits and pieces of survivor memories and griefs. When Dury Felton was asked to help produce a book, Offerings at the Wall, he had a warehouse of objects and images from which to choose. He put that little girl and Rich's letter right there in the middle. And of course Rich, who by now worked for Veterans Affairs, received a copy.
And I turned to page 53, and there was a picture of the picture I'd left at the wall and a note I wrote to the soldier.
It was as if she were staring right at him, refusing to go away, as if she was accusing him of trying to abandon her.
For me, that moment was almost a nightmare. It was like, little girl, what do you want from me? I mean, what do you want from me?
Now the obsession returned full force. He knew he had to get the picture back. So he contacted Dury Felton, who'd become so attached to the photo himself he personally flew from Washington, D.C. to Illinois to hand-deliver it back to Rich. And anyone who didn't understand might have found it rather strange that two middle-aged men who didn't know each other, had never met, would hold on and weep real tears for a small girl neither knew.
And I was talking to my wife one evening, and I said, I don't know if it's something mystic or fate, but I said, somehow I have to return this picture. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, I'm going to find that little girl. I'm going to find that family and that soldier.
A ridiculous idea, of course. He no longer even knew the country, or the language, or what she looked like now, or even if she was alive.
I didn't badger him about it and say, you can't do it, just give it up, forget it. It ain't happening. It's not worth the effort. I'm tired of hearing it.
Did you get tired of hearing it?
Yeah.
This is an obsession.
Yeah.
Hard on you as much as on him.
Yep.
How much did you want that to go away?
I don't know that I wanted it to go away. I wanted him to find peace with it.
So Rich called a newspaper man he knew in St. Louis.
A couple of hours talking about it. And the story made the front page of the Post-Dispatch on a Sunday, I believe.
The plan kept forming as he went. He folded up the article and stuck it in a letter to the Vietnamese ambassador in Washington, D.C.
He'd told me he would forward it to Hanoi, and he said something to the effect that maybe we'll get lucky.
It's a needle in a haystack, Rich.
Exactly. Oh,
It's
yeah,
a big country.
million to one.
And so a copy of the photograph made its way all the way around the world again to the capital of Vietnam, to Hanoi, where an enterprising newspaper editor recognized a good story when he saw one and published the photograph along with an appeal. Does anyone know these people? If the article failed to hit its mark, well, it was a shot in the dark anyway. But there's another way newspapers make their way around, a time-honored tradition, as wrapping paper.
It just so happened that a man in Hanoi decided to send his mother a care package. He happened to wrap that package in this newspaper, the one containing Rich's photo. And then, by some bizarre coincidence probably, the package made its way to a rural village north of Hanoi, where an old woman unwrapped it, saw the photo, took it to a neighboring hamlet, and told the woman there, "Here, this is your father." And before long, thousands of miles away, Rich Luttrell received a letter. The girl had a name, Lan. She had children herself.
It just didn't seem possible. It seemed surreal. I just couldn't believe it was happening. And then, of course, all the emotion again, and now it's real.
And it was complicated, too. He wrote a letter to Lan and her family trying to explain how he felt.
The difference between guilt and regret, okay, I do carry some guilt because of that action, but I have no regret as a soldier in participation in that war, and it was important for me to make sure they understood that.
But around then, it finally dawned on him. He would have to go back to Vietnam himself, would have to carry the photo and give it back. But how could he face his own closet full of horrors? And how would he face the girl?
How do you tell a little girl, "Hi, my name's Rich Luttrell. I killed your father in Vietnam"? There's a risk there. There really is. There's a risk there. I don't know how they're going to react.
Decades after Rich Luttrell aimed his weapon at another human being and pulled the trigger in service of his country, he was about to perform his own personal act of atonement. Coming up,
This is not easy. It's really hard.
the meeting more than 30 years in the making. When Coming Home continues.
This is not easy. It's really hard.
It was early one springtime when Richard Luttrell set out in search of a cure for what tortured him.
The whole thing's bigger than I am. It's hard for me to understand it sometimes myself.
Years ago, he swore he would never go back to that place. He had seen too much killing, too many horrors, all that suffering reflected in that one small image. But now, here he was, on his way to Vietnam, drawn by a photo no bigger than a postage stamp, and like a live thing, it had made its way from a dead man to a dusty trail in Vietnam, to an American GI, a war memorial, to a book, to a wallet, to this bag, on its way home.
This is the flight I've been looking for, huh?
To present the picture to that little girl, the daughter of the man he killed. Will he even know her? He's no teenage grunt, and she must be, well, 40 or so. It's the smell that hits him first. Every memory has one. Normandy, Vietnam, Iraq. The day before he is to meet the girl, now woman, in the photo, Rich is almost beyond nervous.
I'd almost rather face combat again than face this girl.
It's a cloudy Wednesday morning in the north. Rain is threatening as Rich boards a van for the 2.5-hour drive to Lons Village. A drive through a world changing fast, but still utterly different. Past markets crowded with faces amazed to see this entourage, this white-haired man. The village draws closer. In the van, he fidgets, edgy.
Yeah, I have to bring flowers.
And then suddenly Rich and Carol are here, walking. Here is where that somber, serious soldier lived, had his children, the place to which he never returned.
How you feeling?
Nervous.
And then, just around a stone wall, Rich sees a woman and is sure.
I've already seen her. I know who she is.
He takes a moment to compose himself, then walks toward her. And here they are. They had never laid eyes on each other before.
Ciao, Chila.
For a few seconds, they don't know what to say. They're intimate strangers.
Lên hôm nay, thôi.
He recites a sentence he has learned in Vietnamese.
Cô chi bạp cha, cô chi. Mà thôi.
Today, he says, I return the photo of you and your father, which I have kept for 33 years.
Xem tattoo. Ciao, thôi.
Please forgive me. Finally, it all comes pouring out. This terrible, painful release. As if right now, at this moment, she is finally able to give in to grief and cry for the father she never really knew. She clutches Rich as if he were her father himself, finally coming home from the war. Her brother tells us that both of them believe that their father's spirit lives on in Rich. They expect we'll think it's just superstition, and perhaps they say it is. But for them, today is the day their father's spirit has come back to them.
She hasn't been fathered.
The whole village has turned out to see the photo return. Once Rich had wondered about formality, ceremony, but not now.
I told her this is the photo that I took from her father's wallet today that I shot and killed her, and that I'm returning.
She is 40 years old, and it's the first time she has held the photo of herself and her father in her hands. And in this moment, and during the afternoon that followed,
He died a brave man and a courageous warrior.
in the company of former enemies, Rich Luttrell felt as if his wounded soul had been stitched up and made new again.
So sorry.
At which point we could almost imagine some Hollywood director shouting, "Cut! Print!" Except, of course, life isn't quite like that. And in the chapter that follows, you'll see why. Coming up, a new generation, back from a new war, and haunted just like Rich.
You've killed a man. You start to think, did this guy have a 3-year-old daughter back home? Did he have a wife?
Who will help heal their wounds? When Coming Home continues.